Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 7, Photosynthesis. We're talking about the overview, the general concepts behind photosynthesis. Remember that photosynthesis, the word has two parts. Photo means light. Synthesis means making something. Put that together where it makes sense, and that is I use the energy and light to make food. The photo part is harvesting energy from light. And we call that step the light reactions. And we'll talk about those in depth in a bit. The second step is the synthesis part, and that is using the energy from light to make sugar. That is the Calvin-Benson cycle. And remember in the last video I said that I learned it in a rather confusing way or inaccurate way, calling it the light reactions and the dark reactions. We still call them the light reactions. We don't call them the dark reactions anymore. We just call them by their actual name, which is the Calvin-Benson cycle. Why do we call it the Calvin-Benson cycle? Because Dr. Calvin and Dr. Benson discovered it. That's why we call it the Calvin-Benson cycle. I'm sure it'll get a new name in about 20 years because they'll strip the name of the researchers from it. We take the energy that we captured from light, and we use that energy to take this low-energy molecule, these two low-energy molecules called water and carbon dioxide. We use the energy from light, and we take that energy and pump it into these low-energy molecules, carbon dioxide and water, to make this high-energy molecule called sugar. It takes a lot of energy to make this stuff called sugar. But that's what this process of photosynthesis is about, taking energy from light, taking that energy to turn carbon dioxide into sugar. The ATP from the thylakoids, the thylakoid membrane, is used in the stroma, remember the goop inside the chloroplast, to combine carbon dioxide with hydrogen ions to make sugar. This is a really rough overview of this whole process. So what we're looking at right here is this is a single chloroplast. Remember, inside of a plant cell, there will be dozens of chloroplasts. This is just one chloroplast. In that chloroplast, we have a highly folded inner membrane called grana. And that inner membrane is made of this stuff called the thylakoid membrane. Impregnated into this thylakoid membrane is this stuff that we call chlorophyll. That's why it's green. Plants are green because of chlorophyll. When light strikes chlorophyll, the plant will use the energy in that light to split apart water, to steal the hydrogens off. The oxygen isn't used, and so the oxygen bubbles away as a waste product. Stripping the electrons, stripping the hydrogens off of the water, I'm going to use some of that energy to make ATP. I'm going to make another high-energy molecule called NADPH. Now, I understand you haven't seen this before, but what does it look a lot like? It looks a lot like that stuff called NADH, and it's even the same basic symbol as we use for NADH in cellular respiration, which is this thing that's holding two electrons. Let's cheat and say that the P in NADPH is the kind of NADH that plants use. So NADPH, good enough for us, NADPH. It's a special kind of NADH that's used in photosynthesis. So, harvest energy from light. Make high-energy molecules. These high-energy molecules, these are the light reactions. These high-energy molecules made in the light reactions are used to power the Calvin cycle, the Calvin-Benson cycle. The Calvin-Benson cycle takes carbon dioxide from the air, plus the hydrogens and energy from the light to make this stuff that we call sugar. The way I get the energy out is, remember, I take the battery off the charger, I break that last phosphate off of the ADP, that's how I get the energy out of there. The energy that's carried by this NADPH is the hydrogen and those electrons, and I've pulled those off. Those electrons have been pulled off, the hydrogen has been pulled off, because I've got to add hydrogens to carbon dioxide, CO, to get up to CHO, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The hydrogens are used to add to the carbon dioxide to make this stuff that we call sugar. This is the brief overview. But look, it's just a big cycle, right? Energy comes in, energy is pumped into there, I make a high energy output. I then take these low energy products, I pump more energy into them to make high energy products, and I just keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's what photosynthesis is. The first step in this process called photosynthesis is harvesting energy from light. So we need to talk about light. The sun gives off a really broad range of energy. We call this broad range of energy the electromagnetic spectrum, the EM spectrum. This broad range comes from, or ranges from as low as radio waves, which are the lowest energy, to as high as gamma rays, which is the highest energy. Let's talk about how this spectrum is organized, and that is by wavelengths. So, what is a wavelength? You probably talked about this in physics in high school. A wavelength is the length of the wave, either from peak to peak or from trough to trough. The lengths are going to be the same, but that's the wavelength. And if we look at this wavelength is what, about 4 inches. This wavelength is about 10 centimeters, give or take. And we'll talk about what kind of wave this is in just a little bit. But this is a wave. This is the wavelength. So light travels in waves. The shorter the wavelength, the more energy in it. So let me draw 2 waves. All right. I'm going to draw 2 waves. Here's my first wave, which has a relatively long wavelength. Here's my second wave. This wave has a length of about 15 centimeters. What is the length of this wave? Like about 2 millimeters? So 150 millimeters, 15 centimeters is 150 millimeters. 150 millimeter wavelength versus a 2 millimeter wavelength. Of these 2 waves, which one did it cost me more energy to draw? Well, this one didn't cost very much energy. This one cost a whole bunch of energy. Shorter waves, shorter wavelengths have more energy in them. Long wavelengths have less energy, short wavelengths have more. So this shows the electromagnetic spectrum. The longest waves have the least energy. The shortest waves have the most energy. The reason why that thing in your car is called a radio is because it uses radio waves. Radio waves, their range is from, in the meter range, is the wavelength. You measure wavelengths in meters. The longest radio waves are like a kilometer, so like half a mile is the wavelength of radio waves. We go from very long waves, radio waves, down to microwaves. Microwaves you measure in centimeters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This first wave that I drew, this is a microwave. This is probably also, arguably, a microwave. The reason why that thing in your kitchen that you use to heat up your Hot Pocket is called a microwave is because it uses microwaves to heat up your food. The way it actually works is there's one particular wavelength, and I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, go Google it. There's one particular wavelength that causes a resonance vibration in water. As in, like when the singers can make the glass vibrate at just the right pitch until it shatters. It's the same concept for water. This particular wavelength is just the right pitch, essentially. Just the right length that it causes the water to vibrate. And when the water vibrates, it makes it hot. And so as the water vibrates, it gets hot. That heat then is transferred to this food, and then you take out the Hot Pocket and burn your mouth. Microwaves. We go down from microwaves to infrared. Infrared means below red. This is red. Infrared is measured in micrometers, micrometers. Remember, a meter, this is roughly a meter long. I can cut a meter into 1,000 sections. 1 meter equals 1,000 millimeters. Remember, my wave is about 2 millimeters wide. 1 millimeter equals 1,000 micrometers. If I can take a millimeter, and a millimeter is about that wide, that little line I just drew is roughly about 1 millimeter wide. Can I cut that line into smaller sections? And the answer is yes, I can cut that line into smaller sections. You can actually cut that line into 1,000 smaller sections, and those 1,000 smaller sections are called micrometers. We measure infrared in micrometers down to nanometers. That 1 micrometer can be cut into 1,000 nanometers. 1,000 nanometers. A human hair is about 100 micrometers wide, and therefore a human hair is about 100,000 nanometers wide. Just to give you an idea of how small a nanometer is. Infrared and ultraviolet are measured in nanometers. The important part here is the visible spectrum, visible light, is a very narrow section of the EM spectrum. And the different colors of the rainbow are different wavelengths. The longer wavelengths are more towards the red end. The shorter wavelengths are more towards the violet end. And remember, where is there more energy? Long wavelengths or short wavelengths? There's more energy in the short wavelengths. So red is relatively low energy. Purple is high energy. Ultraviolet means above violet. Infrared means below red. Longer wavelengths, less energy than red. Ultraviolet, shorter wavelengths than violet, more energy than violet. As the wavelengths keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, you get down to X-rays. That thing that they do in the dentist to look at your teeth, that thing they do in the doctor's office to look to see if you have a broken bone is called an X-ray because it shoots X-rays at you. Light can't go through you, but X-rays have more energy than light does, and so X-rays can go through you. And so that's how you get this shadow of an image of your bones within your body. And lastly, we get down to gamma rays, and gamma rays are so small they're even measured in features, or rather in units even smaller than nanometers called picometers, but don't worry about those.